The Girl Between Two Worlds by Scarlett Eva Williams. Chapter 5, The First Punishment. In the monastery, children quickly understood one simple thing. You could always be punished. Sometimes for something you did, sometimes for something you did not do, and sometimes simply because the adults decided so. I tried to follow the rules. I tried not to be late. I tried to be quiet and obedient, but it was difficult for me. Inside me lived a girl who was too lively, too free. The same girl who once ran through the house laughing with her father. Girls like that were not liked in the monastery. One morning I was late. I woke up and immediately realized that the bell had already rung. My heart dropped. I jumped out of bed, quickly pulled my dress over my tights and ran. But I already knew I was too late. The prayer had already begun. When we came to breakfast, the supervisor looked at me strogo. "You were late." She broke off a piece of bread and handed it to me. "You will stand." I took the bread and stood by the wall. The room was warm and smelled of food. The girls sat at long tables and calmly ate their breakfast. And I stood. I had to stand through the entire meal with a piece of bread in my hand. I watched them eat. Some whispered to each other, some laughed. I felt ashamed. It seemed to me that everyone was looking at me, but another feeling rose even stronger inside me, injustice. I did not want to cry. I squeezed the bread in my hand and tried to look straight ahead. When everyone finished eating, the supervisor said, "Sit." I sat down at the table. A plate was placed in front of me. The food was already cold. I ate silently. Suddenly I remembered my father. How we used to run through the house, how he laughed, how he said, "Run faster." Something warm rose inside me and I realized one thing. In the monastery, you can make a child stand, you can take away sweets, you can take away holidays, but you cannot force a heart to forget what love feels like. There was another reason why life in the monastery was difficult for me. Most of the girls in our orphanage were social orphans. Many of their parents were alcoholics. Some were drug addicts. Some were in prison. These girls grew up without families. They rarely saw their parents. But I had a mother. She lived here too, on the monastery grounds. She had simply decided to become a nun. There were very few children like me. Sometimes the girls looked at me strangely. Sometimes they said, "You have a mother." In their voices there was no admiration. More often there was pain and maybe a little envy. And yet I was still alone because my mother could visit me only with the abbess's blessing. Sometimes a long time passed between our meetings. That was how I lived between two worlds. I had a mother, but she was almost never near. And perhaps it was then that a feeling appeared in my heart that would stay with me for many years. The feeling of rejection. Chapter 6. A Girl Without a Place. Everything in the monastery was divided. There were nuns, there were novices, there were caretakers, and there were us, the girls from the orphanage. But even among them, I felt different. Most of the girls in our orphanage were social orphans. Many had parents who were alcoholics. Some had parents who were drug addicts. Some had parents in prison. And some girls did not know anything about their parents at all. They grew up without families. They were used to it. But I had a mother. She lived here on the monastery grounds. And that was why I seemed strange. Sometimes the girls asked me, "Your mother is here?" "Yes." "Then why do you live with us?" I did not know what to answer because I did not understand it myself. My mother had chosen to become a nun. That was her path. But for a little girl, it meant only one thing. We could no longer live together. She could visit me only with the abbess's blessing. Sometimes she came. Sometimes she did not come for a long time. I never knew when I would see her again. So every time the door of the orphanage opened, my heart jumped. I raised my head and looked. Maybe it was my mother. Sometimes it was, sometimes it was not. The other girls sometimes looked at me strangely. Sometimes there was envy in their eyes, sometimes confusion. Sometimes someone would say, "You have a mother." But there was no joy in those words, only a question. Why are you here then? Sometimes it seemed to me that I belonged nowhere, not an orphan, but not a child living with her mother either. I was somewhere in between two worlds, between the monastery and family, between love and loneliness. And that was when I began to ask myself a question that would follow me for many years. Where is my home? Sometimes in the evening, when the girls were already going to sleep, I looked out the window. Beyond the monastery walls, there was another world. People lived there, families lived there, children lived with their parents. Sometimes it felt as if my life had stopped behind these walls. As if I were watching life through glass, I could see everything, but I could not reach it. And then I remembered my father again. How he took my hand. How he said, "Come." And I walked beside him freely, without walls, without rules, without punishments. Sometimes it seemed to me that somewhere inside me that little girl was still alive, the one who could simply take his hand and walk into any world. But here in the monastery, no one said, "Come." Here they said, "Stand, be quiet, obey." And then I did not yet know that this feeling of living between worlds would stay with me all my life. And one day it would lead me on a long journey, a journey in search of love.